You will hear different terms this morning. You will hear First Nations, you will hear Original Nations, you will hear First People, you will hear Indigenous people. You may hear Native American, although I think I caught them all, and you may hear Indigenous. They're all in there because people have different preferences. Native people have different preferences. And so I've done what I can to honor the people I've spoken to about this issue, but I wanted to raise it for you too, so that you know that different First Nations people have different preferences about that term. So it might be good to ask. A post on Twitter caught my eye. Now, this opening can lead us to many different stories, most of which end quite badly. However, this particular post was a good thing that also held a lot of hard truth in it. It was from a few days ago and was posted by someone I follow by the name of Lakota Man. I have no recollection why I initially chose to follow Lakota Man, but it has proven worthwhile. If you're interested in trying to have a good experience on Twitter before it literally disintegrates from its own absurd lack of value, you may also wish to follow Lakota Man. 2 days ago, more than that now, several days ago, my friend Lakota Man posted that the Los Angeles Department of Power and Water was helping to bring electricity to parts of the Navajo Nation for the first time. I'm going to say that again. The Los Angeles Department of Power and Water was helping to bring electricity to parts of the Navajo Nation for the first time. Responses to that post included relief that now those residents would only have to travel by truck to haul water to their homes, rather than gas for generators and water. I paused. And I thought about electricity and how very much of it I use every day, and how loud generators are, and how expensive gas is, and how after Hurricane Sandy, when we used a generator, all we had hooked up to it was the fridge and a single space heater. I thought about how my professional life is made easier by writing on a laptop, and how during COVID, I preached over Zoom exclusively. I thought about how my kids have maintained friendships over the internet. I thought about Masterpiece Theater. I thought about the light that I read by at bedtime, and I thought about warm coffee and hot showers. Thinking about all of those technological blessings, I was urged toward a kind of gratitude. And being November, who can't use another gratitude prompt, right? But there's an edge here, isn't there? Like, I'm a little uncomfortable being grateful for all of this ease and warmth I get to have, that so many have been struggling without for so long. In case you're wondering, in the 1920s, about half of all Americans had electricity at home. In 1933, the Tennessee Valley Authority began a huge program of bringing electricity to rural Tennessee, and in 1944, President Roosevelt authorized rural electrification nationwide. So why, 78 years later, are some residents of the Navajo Nation just now seeing progress in being connected to the electrical grid? The answer to that question is about 529 years old. And I'm putting on my history teacher hat for a minute here so that if that's not your subject, buckle up. I'll try to make it fun. In 1493, the year after Columbus's famed voyage, the legal landscape of Europe and all of her colonies changed forever. Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull. So many jokes, and I'm going to let them go by. A legal order that essentially gave Spain the right to the entire New World. The item of interest here is not only who got to claim the territory, but what the bull says about folks who might already be there. And if you're feeling generous and wondering, yes, the Pope did in fact know there were actually people already there. The Pope said that land that was not inhabited by Christians could be discovered and claimed. It was incumbent upon the discoverer to be sure, and I'm quoting here, that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. It is perhaps prudent to recognize that Spain was still reeling from protracted warfare with Spanish and African Muslims who they longed to eject from their Catholic country. How tempting a new territory with converts waiting to fulfill the call of religious imperialism must have been. The doctrine of discovery, as this papal bull came to be known, dictated the policy of European governments and European colonial cultures toward original nations from 1493 forward. I remember in my textbook and in the books I taught from in American history, and I'll bet a good number of you remember this too, that there was a chapter called The Discoverers. Those chapters presented men of courage and adventure, daring to test the boundaries of the known world. The doctrine of discovery complicates that old American history plot. What it meant to be a discoverer, according to this papal bull, was that you had the right to pretty much everything, and you needed, it was your duty to go to war with non-Christians in the interest of overcoming and converting them. This is exactly what was done in those early pre-colonial and colonial days, and for centuries to follow. The doctrine of discovery was written into clear law by the US Supreme Court in 1823, a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall declared that the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right. Absolute right. We didn't use those words very often, just so you know. An absolute right to New World lands, that indigenous Americans had a right to occupy the land, but that right could be abolished. Not really a right then, is it? The removal of original nations from their homelands that had already been underway picked up speed for the following 60 years in particular, establishing reservation lands, marching women and children to them under threat of death, distributing tribal lands to others when the land proved valuable, and eventually creating policies to not just remove the people from their land, but to attempt to remove the culture from the people, to cut their ties to one another, just as they had cut the original nation's ties to the land. And this was all legal. Because if you believe that it is your right to claim something because of someone else's identity, the rational work has been done for you, and society will provide you all of the justification that you need. Now, why, you might wonder, am I walking you through this legal history of property in the New World? It's not just because of my subversive economic beliefs. It is, in addition to being brazenly vile and tragic, a specific example of how othering is institutionalized and maintained with little to no effort on the part of most folks. Because here's the thing: westward expansion and the treatment of First Nations as tolerable tenants who could be moved whenever the land they occupied was deemed valuable by others was not the end of the institutional response to the problem of what to do about the folks who lived here when the land was discovered. You know this. You know about the Trail of Tears. You know about the massacres. You probably even know about the extermination of the buffalo that was specifically undertaken to demoralize the indigenous population. You've perhaps heard about the heartbreak of boarding schools, like the one I described in the reading. The Carlisle School operated under the motto, "Kill the Indian, save the child." Two of these institutions operated here in Illinois. The Homeward Boarding School at the site of Jubilee College in Peoria, and St. Mary's Training School for Boys in Des Plaines. While most of these institutions operated in the late 1800s, some continued on for many years and have living survivors today who can attest to the brutal treatment received while there, all in the name of assimilation, all in the name of making them good. Children were cut off from their access to their own spirituality, from access to their family and community, and were forced to abandon practices and habits that tied them to native cultures. They were forced to cut their hair and speak only in English. They were forced to pray the prayers of the denomination in charge, in some cases on their knees on raw kernels of rice. The Unitarians established the Montana Industrial School for the education of children from the Crow Nation. Despite this group being widely recognized as being the least civilized of all the tribes, sensual and immoral, as described by Science magazine in 1887, Science. The damage done by such schools is incalculable. Our history of domination and subjugation and cultural warfare does not end there, and the telling could take days. So I beg your patience. You've heard all of the statistics of the ways that these and so many other failed policies have impacted the still living community of First Nations people here in this country that espouses freedom and clings to a depiction of the first Thanksgiving as one of cooperation and mutual trust. The improvements occurring on the land of the Navajo Nation now are a result of the infrastructure bill that passed last year by a wing and a prayer. You cannot own property. You must be overthrown. You must be converted. You must be assimilated. You cannot have your family. You cannot have your culture. You cannot have electricity. Cultures persist through determination. But there's no question about the damage the system has wrought since 1493. The rehearsal of this information, my repetition, the continuous inequity, my tracing it to its papal roots, may feel like so many other moments that we've taken in our UU communities in an attempt to see the domination in our history so we can hope to do better. And it's shattering. It is shattering because we cannot imagine being part of such brutality, nor can we fathom a way to make things right. We may even tell ourselves that we didn't make this mess, that we shouldn't have to pay for things that people who lived centuries before us and whose ideals more obviously outpaced their actions did in fact do. We shake our heads in pity. We may even feel some guilt or discomfort, but really, the problem is too big. It's too old. And who are we? The people of UUSG, or even the UUs of Northern Illinois, to think that we can do something about it. The problem is big, like really, structurally and culturally big. It has tentacles and legal ramifications. It has children and grandchildren. It has new locations and new faces. It is too big to imagine, and it will break our hearts again and again and again. And I fear that the learning and the heartbreak becomes quite a rest stop for most of us, myself included. Those of us who live reasonably comfortable lives and who have perhaps not been part of a marginalized group find ourselves struggling to integrate the reality that others experience. I would suggest that processing through that feeling is necessary. If you find that your feelings or your lack of practice in moving through them leaves you a bit paralyzed, stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, unmoving. Because the rest of the message boils down to this. There's a lot I don't know. I do know that our principles and the most deeply held values of our faith and the sources on which it draws call us to actively construct a world where we do not thrive through domination, whether its form be blatant and obvious or subtler and structural. Our faith calls us to a place where we cannot actually rest in comfort while others suffer. And our faith calls us to a place where gratitude for our own abundance, land acknowledgements, prayers of thanksgiving, are wildly insufficient. And I feel that wave of overwhelm wash over me again. It's too big. It is too old. I didn't create it, and I don't know how to undo this. What can I do? Who are we to attempt to unravel centuries of mistreatment? We are people. Men, women, non-binary, children, gay, straight, black, white, and brown, who are called to build a land of people so bold. Those are the words, so bold. Bold enough to shake their very foundations for the establishment of peace and justice for all. So where do we begin? We begin where we are. We begin with our thinking, with noticing the patterns of domination in our day-to-day lives, the assumptions we make about the way things should go. Noticing the times who we are helps us to do what we want to do. We notice and make choices that align with our values of justice. We begin by using our feet and our hands to contribute to the greater good, challenging the impact of our economic divide by helping to distribute food, supplies, education, childcare, and healthcare to all of our beloveds, not just with our checkbooks, but with our bodies, to learn that lesson and demonstrate our commitment with the sweat of our labor. We begin by seeing the circles that we draw and that we inhabit, and incessantly and insistently draw them wider with welcome and curiosity for all of our relations. This was the phrase I learned from a Lakota man just a month ago. All of our relations. He was including the grass. I was working on the grass. Each and every living being that is part of our interdependent web. This is our shared theology. It is not from an outside do-gooder. For if we can only do that, see that interdependent web, how can we do anything but demand equity, justice, and systems that actively work not to preserve the status quo, but to serve those in deepest need? How can we solve this ancient problem born out of bigotry, greed, and religious intolerance? How, dear friends, can we not? Our old ways of relating to those who we deem other is built on total domination. We can only build something new. And to do that, we will have to both learn and act. We can learn about cultures of reciprocity, as referenced by Robin Wall Kimmerer in your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Book Club's current selection, Braiding Sweetgrass, that I read from earlier. We can learn about and charge ourselves to practice the honorable harvest as a way to honor the systems on this fair planet that function in ways we scarcely understand. We can learn about really sharing power and the gifts of community in ways that we have never experienced. We can ditch the old story about Thanksgiving and instead show our gratitude for this one earth, for all life on it, and for the love we have to give and share through our actions every day. We can only build a new land in our hearts, in our minds, and with our hands and the sweat of our brow. A new land with new systems and new morals, new understandings of how to love without subjugation, without domination. We can step beyond guilt and gratitude and move into new construction, building a land different from the one that was discovered, building a society that operates by consent, a land where the life of each and every one of our relations is and will always remain more important than any of our institutions. May it be so. Amen.